Shalom, this is Tony Robinson from Restoration of Torah Ministries, and I want to welcome you to my Torah podcast. This is episode number 14, and in this episode, we'll be looking at Moses as a man-child. We're going to see how Moses is one of many people that we can consider as a man-child. But first, what I want to do is I want to make a clarification on the previous episode 13. And I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on something. I was making the point that Psalm 2 and Psalm 8, they share the common theme of someone coming to life. Right? Someone is brought to life in Psalm 2 and Psalm 8. And I specifically talked about Psalm 2, verse 7, how it says, I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, today I have begotten you. And I referenced Acts 13:33. And I said in Psalm 8, verse 5, it talks about how you have made him a little lower than the angels. In other words, it was the creation of Adam. And the point I was trying to make is that in Psalm 2 and in Psalm 8, in both of those Psalms, you have life, you have the creation of life, right? And so with Psalm 8, it's actually Adam being created. But in Psalm 2, when David said in verse 7, today I have begotten you, Acts 13:33 says that speaks of the resurrection of Yeshua from the dead. And the point that I was making is that you can see it's as if they both came from the dust of the earth. Anyway, the point I want to make is that Yeshua's body never saw corruption at all. It did not decay one iota. I think the way I said it, it might have hinted or implied that his body did see corruption, and obviously that is not true. So I wanted to go ahead and state that in case I have any enemies that are listening and they try to seize upon that. Ha ha ha. Okay. So anyway, so this podcast, what we're looking at is Moses, and we're going to see how the Bible teaches that he's a man-child. Okay, so our main passages that teach us what a man-child is Revelation 12. All right, that's our foundational passage. But we saw that also Genesis 1 through 3 and Psalm 2 and Psalm 8. When you take all of those passages together, they teach us the 5 themes that define and identify a biblical man-child. And so in the next few in the next few episodes, we're going to take a journey through the Tanakh and the apostolic writings, and we're going to discover the prophetic forerunners of the Revelation 12 man-child. Okay? And so by discovering the prophetic forerunners of the Revelation 12 man-child, we'll also discover the calling and purpose for the Revelation 12 man-child and be able to understand their role in the end times. Okay? So one of the themes that identifies a man-child is that the man-child is born from a woman in great travail. We get that from Revelation 12:2 and Genesis 3:16. In Genesis 3:16, it says, 15 and 16, it says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. Verse 16, to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Now, I want to specifically focus on I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. Well, that's thematically connected to Revelation 12:2, where it says, then being with child, she, the woman of Revelation chapter 12, cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And so we noted before how Revelation 12:2 and Genesis 3:16 teach us that a biblical man-child, his mother will be a woman in great travail. And so what I want to do is I want to look at this phrase, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and conception. Now, this phrase makes sense. The first part of the phrase makes perfect sense. I will greatly multiply your sorrow. But it says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. So the question is, what does it mean that I will greatly multiply your conception? Okay? Think about that. What does that mean? I will greatly multiply your conception. Right? You see the conundrum there? I can understand I will greatly multiply your sorrow, but what does it mean to greatly multiply your conception? So in order to figure this out, let's compare translations of Genesis 3:16. In the KJV, it says, unto the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. And in the New King James, it says, I will multiply your sorrow and your conception. So both the King James and the New King James, they both basically say the same thing. I will multiply your sorrow and your conception. But the New American Standard Bible translates that as, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. See, that's a little different. And the English Standard Version says, I will multiply your pain in childbearing. Okay. And so those are all quite different. So again, the King James Version and New King James Version, I have no idea what it means to multiply your conception. The NASB tries to clean it up by saying, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. Now, childbirth is only one aspect of bringing forth a child. Childbirth is exactly what it says, actually delivering a child. Okay. Well, I have a problem with that one because that sounds a little redundant, because it says, I will greatly multiply your child. It says, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. And then it repeats it again, in pain you shall deliver children. Well, he's already said that. Now, I recognize that sometimes the Bible uses parallelisms and repetition, but that just doesn't seem correct to me. And let's look at what the ESV says. It says, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. Okay, so whereas the NASB says, I will multiply your pain in childbirth, the ESV says childbearing. Now, childbearing is much more comprehensive. Childbearing covers every aspect of bringing forth a child. It covers conception, it covers the pregnancy, and it covers the actual physical bringing forth of the child. And so as you can see, childbearing is a much broader term than childbirth. Okay, so let's see if we can get at this. All right, so the problem pertains to how to translate the Hebrew. And in the Hebrew, there's a conjunction, the conjunction vav. In the Hebrew, it's attached as a prefix to the Hebrew word meaning your conception. In other words, the phrase and your conception is one word in the Hebrew. It has as a prefix a vav, which normally translates as and then the word conception, right, in the Hebrew, and then it has a suffix which means your, and altogether it's and your conception. So this is what I want to posit. Although many times vav does mean simply and, that's not always the case, as the Hebrew conjunction vav can also function in other ways besides just as the English equivalent of the word and I believe that's what's occurring here. So for instance, sometimes the conjunction vav is used to clarify something that preceded it. Okay? This is a common usage in Hebrew, and it's the context that has to tell you whether or not you translate that vav as and, meaning just the conjunction and, or if it's something else. And what I am saying is that in this case, the conjunction vav is used to clarify what preceded it. And when used in that way, it's called an explicative vav, okay? And it's called an explicative vav. And so what I'm getting into is aspects of Hebrew syntax, okay? How to translate it meaningfully. What did the writer intend the meaning to be? And so sometimes vav doesn't mean and. Sometimes it's an explicative vav, and when it is, it should be translated as namely or specifically, not and. So for example, I'm going to give you an example. If it's an explicative vav, you could translate it this way: I will greatly multiply your sorrow namely your conception. Or you can translate it this way: I will greatly multiply your sorrow, specifically your conception. Now that word that's translated conception, it means either conception or it means pregnancy. Okay, it's conception or pregnancy. That's another reason why I don't like the NASB's translation of that word as childbirth, okay? Because the Hebrew word there does not mean childbirth. It means conception and or pregnancy. That word is only used 3 times in the Bible, and all 3 times it's translated as conception, right? So the verse, if I were translating it, it would have read something like this: I will greatly multiply your sorrow, namely or specifically your conception, or I could have said namely or specifically your pregnancy. Okay, so what's going on here is this verse is stating that Adonai will greatly increase the woman's sorrow, specifically sorrow associated with conception and pregnancy. Okay, and so this clears up the confusion of what it means to I will greatly multiply your conception. Well, that's not what the Hebrew is saying. It's saying I will greatly multiply your sorrow, and it uses an explicative valve, right, which is going to clarify something that preceded it, and it's saying namely or specifically your conception or pregnancy. Now, and if you have a problem saying, well, Tony Robinson, you're not a Hebrew scholar, what I want to do is I want to say that apparently the English Standard Version translators, they may have also seen the valve as an explicative valve, because the ESV translation is just another way of rendering the Hebrew as I've suggested above. Remember, I told you that the valve, right? The valve in front of the word conception in the Hebrew, it's an explicative valve, and it's telling you, it's clarifying something that preceded it. Well, that's exactly what the ESV translation does. Listen to it. I will surely multiply your pain, and then what kind of pain? In childbearing. So you see, they are explaining, right, the type of pain. So whereas I said I will greatly multiply your sorrow, namely or specifically your conception and pregnancy, the ESV says I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. And again, childbearing is all-inclusive, meaning conception, pregnancy, the whole kit and caboodle. And so that's what's really going on there. So as you can see, again, childbearing includes every aspect of the procreation process: conception, pregnancy, and birthing. So what is the ramification of what we've just learned? Genesis 3:16 was a prophetic utterance revealing that Adam and Eve's sin would have far-reaching effects and ramifications, especially for man-child. For example, Genesis 3:16, all right, once you understand that what it's saying is that I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing, which includes conception and pregnancy, Genesis 3:16 is the reason the matriarchs suffered so many things just to conceive and bring forth a child, let alone the physical childbirth, okay? Furthermore, have you noticed how often in the Bible a woman who is destined to bring forth either a messianic forerunner or a prominent leader in Israel will be plagued by barrenness and all sorts of other troubles and woes just to conceive and carry the child through delivery? Have you ever noticed that? The reason why is because of Genesis 3:16. But you would never know that from the translation of the King James Version or the New King James Version or the NASB, because neither one of them, first of all, the New King James and the King James, the translation is clumsy. I will greatly increase your conception. What in the world does that mean? The NASB says I'm going to increase your pain in childbirth, where the Hebrew word in the Hebrew has nothing to do with childbirth. And so But what it's talking about is even the very conception of a child will be wrought with sorrows. And that's why all three of the matriarchs experienced barrenness: Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel. Sarah bore the stigma of barrenness decade upon decade. And then once she was pregnant, she suffered through Hagar's disrespect. Okay. And then Rebecca, remember, Rebecca was barren for the first 20 years of her married life. Isaac had to pray for her to conceive. And then remember, once she conceived, she had a terrible pregnancy because the boys were fighting. And at one point she said, Lord, what's going on here? Right? Rachel suffered barrenness, and her barrenness was a major source of dysfunction in Jacob's family. So what's going on with the three matriarchs? What's going on with the three matriarchs is Genesis 3:16. They are women in travail, right? Just like Revelation 12 says, a man-child will be born to a woman in travail. And that's what happened with these women. Remember Samuel's mother, right? Remember Samuel's mother, Hannah? Remember how barren she was? She was the one who was to bring forth who? Samuel, right? Who was to be a judge in Israel. What about Manoah's wife? Remember Manoah's wife? Samson's mother was what? Barren. She brought forth a judge in Israel, Samson. Remember Elizabeth? John the Baptist's mother was what? Barren. He was a forerunner of Messiah. So as we can see, all of these women suffered according to Genesis 3:16. They had sorrow in conception and they had sorrow in pregnancy. And the ESV, the English Standard Version, hits the nail right on the head in their translation when they say, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing, not just in childbirth. Okay. All right. So let's see now how this theme of a woman in travail is manifested in Moses' life, because my contention is that of the 5 themes that identify and define a man-child, we will be able to see those themes in the lives of a biblical man-child. This theme of the travail of the mother when she brings forth a man-child is accomplished in Moses' life in at least 3 manifestations. First of all, Moses' mother suffered through her pregnancy, with Moses knowing that as soon as he was born, he was supposed to die. Exodus 1:22. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born to you, you shall cast into the river. Okay? So his mother, all during her pregnancy, she had that fear and that thought that when he was born, he already has a death sentence on him. But after having saved him, she hid him for 3 months. His mother suffered again as she had to set him in a basket upon the Nile River. Okay, Exodus 1:22. Again, every son who is born you shall cast into the river. Okay. Here's a third way, and this isn't specifically with Moses' mother, but this is with all of the other women who were children, all of the other women of Israel, right? Possibly hundreds of women suffered the death of their children, their boys, as a result of the pending birth of Israel's deliverer, Moses. So in other words, what I'm saying, that Moses is a man-child because his mother suffered the travail of conception and pregnancy. But not only did Moses' mother suffer, all of the other mothers who brought forth male children suffered, according to Genesis 3:16, because Moses was the deliverer who was about to be born. In Exodus 1:16, it says, Pharaoh said to the midwives, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it's a daughter, then she shall live. And also, Pharaoh had said, you need to throw all male babies into the Nile. And what I want to share with you is that this command was satanically inspired because the devil knew it was time for the deliverer to be born. And so when Pharaoh tried to have the midwives kill the male boys. And secondly, when he told when he told everyone to throw their male children into the river, this was a satanically inspired command, because Satan knew that it was time for the deliverer to be born, and this was his attempt to snuff out the life of Moses before he was even born. Because we're told in Genesis 15 verses 13 through 14, we're told this: Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they serve I will judge. So Satan knew the 400-year period, and he knew it was time for Adonai to raise up someone to deliver the children of Israel. And it was his attempt through Pharaoh to snuff out the life of the man-child Moses before he was even born. So as you can see, potentially hundreds of other women besides Yocheved suffered, according to Genesis 3:16, simply because a man-child, Moses, was about to be born. Those women, they suffered greatly, according to Genesis 3:16, because of the enmity of the seed, right? That's the second theme that identifies a man-child, the enmity of the seed, Genesis 3:15, as the serpent used his servant Pharaoh to try to destroy Adonai's man-child. Okay, so the story of Moses' birth is also a prophetic foreshadowing of Adonai's ultimate man-child, Yeshua. I want you to think about this. The story of Moses' birth is also a prophetic foreshadowing of the birth of Adonai's ultimate male child, Yeshua. Think of how Genesis 3:16 was fulfilled in association with the birth of Yeshua, when Herod had every male child 2 years old and younger killed in Bethlehem and its surrounding areas. In other words, we see a common theme at the birth of Moses, the deliverer of the nation of Israel, and at the birth of Yeshua, the deliverer of the world, that in both of those stories, that male children were killed at the time of the birth of those two man-childs, right? Those two deliverers, all because Satan was trying to snuff out their life. Okay. All right. So it is at this time that we need to also take notice of how Moses fulfilled a second theme of a biblical man-child. And the second theme is that there is a deadly conflict between the man-child and the serpent. So in Revelation 12, 1 through 5, that's our foundational passage that defines and identifies a man-child. We've already seen how Revelation 12, it talked about how John talks about how he saw a woman in travail and in labor to bring forth a child. We've just seen how Moses, his mother, she suffered, right? She suffered in childbearing, and also did other women. But we also, in Revelation 12, we noted that there's the enmity of the seed, that the serpent was standing in front of the woman to devour her child, as her man-child, as soon as it was born. We see the same thing happening with Moses. Okay, we see the same thing. So from our previous discussion, we can clearly see the fulfillment of this second theme in Moses' life, as Pharaoh tried to execute Moses immediately upon his birth. Remember he had told the midwives, as soon as you see it's a child, you kill it. In other words, can't you see how that is thematically connected to Revelation 12, where it says the serpent stood before the woman to devour her child as soon as it was born? That's exactly what was happening, what the devil tried to get to happen with the midwives, but it didn't work. And so then Pharaoh said, hey, you have to throw those male children in the river as soon as they're born. In other words, we see with Moses and with the man-child of Revelation 12 that the serpent is trying to kill them immediately upon their birth, just as the serpent tried to destroy the Revelation 12 man-child immediately upon his birth. The devil also had Pharaoh try to destroy Moses later in his life, after he had killed the two Egyptians. That was a second attempt. And a third attempt was Pharaoh's intent to destroy Moses at the splitting of the Red Sea. So what we've seen in this teaching here in episode 14, we've seen that two themes taken from Revelation 12. The first theme being that the man-child is born from a woman in great travail, and the second theme being that there's a deadly conflict between the man-child and the serpent. We can clearly see the fulfillment of those two themes in Moses' life and marking him as a biblical man-child. Okay, so we're going to continue to progress through the remaining three themes found in Revelation 12, Genesis 1 through 3, Psalm 2, and Psalm 8. And we're going with those remaining three themes, three of the five, we're going to discover how they apply to Moses also, thus confirming that Moses is one of many who bear the status of a man-child, and it's Revelation chapter 12 that gives us those five themes, that points the way to those five themes. So I hope you've been encouraged by this teaching, and I hope you will continue to study with us. And as I always say at the end of all of my teachings, may Adonai bless you, and according to Psalm 119, verse 18, may he open your eyes that you may behold wondrous things from his Torah. Amen, amen, shalom, shalom.